Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach. Going to take a look at a few of the new positions players have been offered for SuperCoach 2019 in a sec, but just off the top, I've been a little bit slack, so my apologies. Hopefully you had a nice Christmas. It's certainly been busy with work and everything that goes on with this sort of period of the year, so I have been a little bit slack on the old SuperCoach vids, but certainly over the next, couple of months really, as we really get stuck into it, there will be much more frequent videos. So hopefully you're sticking around, and I'm sure, this is generally in the new year is normally when people really start to get a bit of a thirst for the SuperCoach, even though cricket and BBL and tennis certainly have plenty to offer. But as I said, wanted to look at a few new positions that have been revealed. It's always of interest. It always shapes the dynamic of our team, because with new positions comes new players' value, because sometimes there's guys that you just simply wouldn't select in the midfield on their own, but if they get a little defensive or forward tag alongside them, all of a sudden they're a little bit more relevant. And I think the main line that we tend to look at is the midfield forward. Those forward players that are also midfielders, and in essence we can pick them in the forward line, but they're going to run through the middle more or less. That's the sort of guys we want. And there's a big list, and that's where we'll start. Now, I've just listed some of the players that I'm interested in, and a lot of these guys are locks. I mean, Paddy Dangerfield, you've just got to lock him in. I mean, most people are going to have him if he was just pure mid, but it's an absolute no-brainer. You just have to have him. Tim Kelly, another very interesting one, another cat. Now, there are a few Geelong players in the forward line that we should consider, but I wouldn't want to overdo it. Too many players in the one line from the one club can be risky. And Kelly's probably one that I'd just tread with caution. He had an unbelievable first up year, as we know. So much debate about him going home. How will that affect his football? How will that affect his head? Who knows? But more than that, I just think the second year, I know he's mature age, but the second year for any player, particularly ones that burst out big time in their first year, can be difficult. Teams do a lot more homework on them. There's a fair bit more study going into them, and it is hard to repeat what was an unbelievable first year. So tread with caution. It's a long way out. A lot of talk that Ablett's going to play a lot more forward this year. That's going to help a guy like Tim Kelly. So there's pros and cons, but I'm just going to go through just a quick little thought process on a few of these players. Isaac Heaney, it's very simple. Lock him into your side. Perfect sort of selection in my opinion. He's reasonably priced. He's a guy who's long touted to be a guy who can take the competition by storm. He's yet to absolutely do it. He's had some really, really good seasons, some really good games, but I think the more this Sydney midfield transitions from that old crew that we've known for so long, it's looking a fair bit different now, and Isaac Heaney is a guy who's going to take on board a lot more of that responsibility. Still eligible as a forward, which is beautiful for us. I think we should lock him in, even at this early stage. Robbie Gray, tough to say on him. I think his injury history always makes us a bit wary. There is a bit of an unknown. Wingard out of the side, how does that affect Gray? He's one that we're just going to have to assess. I'm always pretty wary with him because his body has continually let him down. He's had some unbelievable averages when he was pure mid. Seemingly those days are behind him on a consistent basis week to week, but he could offer a bit of value nonetheless. So not value, but he could be a top 6 player at his best. There's a little bit of risk and a little bit of baggage that comes with a guy like Robbie Gray. Devon Smith was an absolute gem of a buy last year. He was a player that served me extremely well. I was very pleased with him. I wouldn't be absolutely jumping on board just because there's no real reason. I just think there's a lot of guys that I've been looking at that I perhaps like a bit more. And I just think sometimes when those guys break out, it was fantastic last year. He was a bit of a breakout guy for us. We got him under the odds. But this time around, we're going to pay that top dollar. We're going to pay a bit of coin. And it just makes you go, oh, all of a sudden he's like fantastic for us last year. But this time around, we got to fork out a bit of coin. And he's only really had one genuine premium season. I know he had a couple of, averages in the 90s, early 90s as a giant. But you just got to think about a little bit extra. So he'll be one to monitor, that's for sure. Toby McLean, I don't mind him. had an outstanding start to the season. If you break up his first half and his second half, the numbers are a big, big difference. And why was that? Well, I'm not exactly sure. We'd have to delve a little bit deeper. Liberatore's back into the mix. You know, there's a few guys in that dog side that it's tough to get a read on. How does it affect one another? But I think McLean, particularly early in the season, I said, had a fantastic run through the midfield and really warmed to that position and reaped the rewards of that responsibility. I didn't see a stack of Dogs games. I couldn't say with 100% surety that that role changed or he just lost a bit of form. But there was definitely a drop-off in his numbers. So that'll be interesting. I might have to read a bit more into that when I profile him. Sam Menegola, another Geelong player, as I mentioned. He's been really consistent in a funny way for a long time. He's often around the high 90s, early 100s. But he isn't really a guy who dishes up those sort of numbers on a week-to-week basis. He's often your 130, then a 70, a 115, an 86 sort of setup. But if it all ends up around 100, then you can't complain. And he's done that for a little bit now. I think he's a pretty solid option. Again, he's a player that you just got to look at that Geelong side and see, well, who's really going to run through the midfield? I think if Menegola gets more midfield minutes, very, very juicy proposition. The one time or the times he has struggled is when he gets caught on more of a half-forward flank. He's playing a bit more forward, gets involved, but just not enough. So I think he's one that we've certainly got to have on a short list, and we'll wait and see how the preseason rolls out. Michael Walters, a lot of people are going to start screaming and just say, no way, he's a burn man, he's destroyed me too many times before. But he's a guy that I'm really going to consider. Now, to be fair, he burnt me last year as well. It was last year, wasn't it? You know, when he came back and I think he got injured, came back, got suspended or something like that, and really just had us pulling our hair out. He's a frustrating guy. He's a bit of a hot and cold style of player. And I think when he plays forward, then clearly, like we see with those smaller forward types, it doesn't always bode well for consistency in SuperCoach. But I think we've seen him play and show enough as a midfielder. And I'll be watching very closely as to where he does line up and train with through the pre-season, because Lachie Neale has left the Dockers. They're going to need a bit of help through that midfield. Now, I know the likes of, say, Connor Blakely and, you know, Langdon and these types coming through, maybe they'll be the guys to pick up that slack. But it could be a guy like Walters. It'll just be dependent on whether Ross Lyon sees him playing forward or midfield, where his best value to the Dockers lies. But I tell you what, he has been thrown around a bit in the past, but if he is playing midfield, I would potentially roll the dice. But it's a long way off now, but it will be one to watch. They're all sort of the premium ones. A couple of guys that could break into that premium status. I mean, Cham Wigard, you've got to have a look at him. Going to the Hawks, they've got a good track record of getting guys to play their best football, and Wingard has not played his best football consistently throughout his career. He's had unbelievable seasons, unbelievable games, but really from those early years where he really burst onto the scene and we thought, this guy is going to be an absolute champion, he's going to tear this comp apart, he hasn't really come on. He's sort of been a guy who just seemingly can flick it on and off a little bit. You know, the work rate's been questioned. Is he hard enough? You know, why is he not doing it each week? Because we see the best of him occasionally, and like he's burnt me in the past. It'd take a bit for me to go back there. I think he showed us last year that when he plays through the middle, he's very talented. He reads the play well. He's got nice hands. He's evasive. I think he's a handy midfielder. The Hawks need midfielders. Is that what they've got in mind? Be very, very interesting to see. He's a guy who's been up and down like a yo-yo when it comes to his year-on-year averages. Where's it going to be at a new club? Very tough to say. It would come with a fair bit of risk, but if he turns it on in the pre-season, well, there's going to be a lot of talk about him. And Jack Martin, Gold Coast son, bit of a prodigy, a lot of talk about him over the years. You know, when he was at Gold Coast, just the comparisons to some of the superstars of our game. Big time. Now, we haven't really seen it from him either. We've seen gradual improvement and a slow burn from Martin. In a poor side, albeit, he's played forward, he's played back, he's played through the middle. I think inevitably he's a midfielder. And I'm a big fan of him. I think he's silky, he's got class, he's got pace. I think he's a really skillful player, and I think he's the sort of guy who's just taken him a little bit to believe that he belongs, as well as having a slight frame, so it takes a bit to really build into a midfielder's body. I'll be watching him really closely through the pre-season. I could not see myself starting with him unless he really burnt it up, but he's a guy that I really like. Just the fact that he's in a Gold Coast Suns outfit that's going to be awful, it might provide him midfield opportunity, but it might just really make it difficult for him to really break out and be consistent. It can go both ways, but he's a very talented player and the sort of guy that each year you go, this could be his breakout, and he averages 81. You go, this could be his breakout, he averages 78. Soon enough, he's going to burst in the 90s, and at some stage in his career, I think he'll average 3 figures. When will that be? We'll have to wait and see. And then Will Setterfield, he's a bit of a no-brainer. He is a midfield forward option. He's really cheap, former top pick. New club. If he gets his body right, I think he's a very, very good option. That rounds it out for the mid-forwards. Just a couple defender midfielders. Andrew McGrath. I am a big fan of him. I also think, like Martin, he's a guy that's been highly touted. He's a former #1 pick. Really breaks the lines off that back line. And as we know, he played his under-18s as a midfielder. Had big numbers in that competition. I don't see him getting that spot just yet, but tell you what, when he does, I think he'd be a really, really good option. I mean, Dylan Shields come to the club, and they've got Heppel, Smith goes through there, they've got Merritt, there's other guys in there as well. So I'm not sure McGrath's going to get enough midfield time, and again, like Martin, he's averaged around that 70, 80 mark for much of his career. He's too good to stay around there. At some stage, he's going to break out, and you'll want to be on board when he does, but we know these breakout options can often burn us. So probably, unless we see big indications that he's going through the midfield full-time, he's probably one you would have to steer clear, but I'm a big fan of him, so I thought I'd put him on the list. And in terms of a ruck forward option, Justin Westhoff is attracting a little bit of attention from some people. Yes, Langers, I'm talking to you, mate. There have been a few who are liking him in the R2 position. I just want to delve a little bit deeper as this pre-season goes on. I'm not sold on him. The reason his RF availability is because he did get those opportunities without Ryder, and Port Adelaide needed him to go through there, which resulted in a really nice average. What was it, 100, 101? I can't quite recall, but previously he has averaged around your 80s and 90s. Now, is that enough? I have my concerns that when he goes back to more of a forward line option, that he's going to be a little bit more up and down. He's a very good player, he can drop back and take some marks, he can kick goals, certainly a very talented player, but he is getting on a bit. Not the sort of guy we're going to see a spike in improvement with his numbers unless it comes via the positional change, which we saw last year. If he reverts back, I think, who did Port Adelaide recruit? They got a few, didn't they? I can't exactly recall who they got to the club, but I know they'll have a bit more ruck options. Was it Lysette and Ryder's back? I'm just guessing there. But they're a couple of guys that might see Westhoff's role change. So that's going to be something we have to discuss, because you can't really have Grundy and Gawn. That's breaking the bank. Maybe you can, maybe you do. I probably wouldn't. Who's going to be in the ruck too? It's a very, very interesting question, but it is one for another day. But it's worth pondering nonetheless. A few guys who lost their dual position status. Some are still relevant, some are not. Hugh McCluggage, just a midfielder. That hurts, that rules him out. If he was in the forward line, potential, very talented player, sort of in the same mould as I was discussing with McGrath and Martin. De Goey, just a forward, that'll tempt a few. Pierce Hanley, just a defender, keeps in the mix, but gee, you'd be pretty bold to go with him. Aaron Francis is just a forward. How the hell does that work? I swear he was playing defence for the most part of the year. Anyway, could be one people consider, because he did show a lot in terms of being an intercept defender. Taranto, just a mid, rules him out, was probably always on the cards, but does hurt. Very talented player, and I like him a lot. Sicily, just a defender. A lot of people will pick him. quite a good option. We saw what he could do last year. Very, very good breakout season. Brayshaw, midfielder, of course. There's no surprises there. We lapped him up as a defender midfielder last year. Very lucky. It's one of those things with the SuperCoach system how it just sometimes they give you a little kiss like that and you just got to lap it up. Clearly was always going to be a midfielder. And then Lambert, Kane Lambert, he's a forward. You know, just a guy who's been a tempter of years gone by. Sometimes has been a very good option. I wouldn't have thought would be going near him. And Travis Boak is just a forward as well. And he's an interesting player. You know, he sort of moved from that midfielder now into more of a forward position. Where do Port see him long term? Where do they see him in 2019? More precisely, if he were to get back in the midfield, then he might be a guy we consider. We've seen him average mid-90s and good numbers, but one would have to suggest he's probably not a guy we're going to look at, but worth a note. That is going to have to wrap it up for me, guys. A few names to consider there, and it is interesting when we do get some new players with new positions and whatnot. So thanks for tuning in. I will be back pretty soon, I would imagine, with a few more player profiles, I would think. I'll certainly want to discuss that ruck situation. I think that's really interesting in this early stage. There's a few ways we can go about it, and I think it will prove quite tricky, the way we go about it, and quite defining. But I'll wrap it up there. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. Ring the bell or whatever you got to do these days. YouTube's just going past me, I tell you. But do whatever you need to do to get my content first. I will endeavour to get these videos rolling much quicker. I've got some holidays coming up in January which will allow me to pump them out a bit quicker. And yeah, look, have a good new year, guys. Party hard, but not too hard. Just be safe, you know, but have a bit of fun. I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.